Sky News Canberra.
Let's go to our first political panel of the afternoon. Sydney Liberal MP Jason Falinski from Perth, Labor MP Patrick Gorman. Gentlemen, thanks both for your time. Jason, I noticed in your tweet you've got the boxing gloves on today. You might need the spinner's hat to talk up this economy. What's going on?
If this is your first political panel for the afternoon, how many do you have? After Pat and I, that should be enough for at least a week.
Well, I've got the 3-hour shifts, so look, I'm sure you'll be the best one. But so we've had, this is the 2 days of news. Wage growth still sluggish, stuck at 2.2%, and now unemployment up with 20,000 jobs lost. What's going on?
Well, look, the monthly figures jump around a lot, so you would expect to see from time to time figures go, 0.1 or 0.2% either side of what's been the long-term average. Long-term average has been down. We've created nearly 1.5 million jobs, or the economy has created nearly 1.5 million jobs since the government was elected. You've got employment growth at 2.5%. You've got real wage growth, which is, by the way, double the OECD average, higher than anyone else in the G7. And you've got 0.6% real wage increases as well. You have minimum wage increases that have always been higher than the rate of inflation. This is the sort of stuff you're seeing under this government. We'll continue those policies that have delivered those solid results.
We're not in the G7, but aside from that one...
No, but we can compare ourselves to the G7, Tom.
Well, we can compare ourselves to Botswana if we want.
But we're not. We're comparing ourselves to the 7 largest economies in the world, who happen to be in the G7.
Right. But it makes more sense often to compare yourself to groups you're in because they're similar
like the OECD.
Let's move on from that.
We are growing.
That's fine. But this is also the biggest drop in jobs for 5 years, and we've just had a big income tax cut
since September.
Should be should be going through.
Tom. This is the first drop in jobs since September 2016, which, if my maths is right, is only 3 years, or 3 years and 2 months.
I'm saying the biggest drop. Since
right.
2014.
Okay. All right. Well,
and
as I say, the monthly figures are variable.
Fine.
Sorry, what was that? Pardon me?
Despite the biggest drop in the 5 years, and we've got the income tax cut flowing through the economy, that just sounds like a bad combination to me, that it might not be working.
Well, I'm sorry it sounds like a bad combination to you, and I don't want you to be vexed by this, but these are monthly figures. We need to see what the trend is. I think the economy is doing well. You will see, especially compared to the G7 and the OECD, of which we are a member, as that was a concern to you. Look, I think the government is doing everything that we possibly can. The economy is performing relatively well in a global sense. There's no doubt there have been some global headwinds, but looking forward, as the IMF has said, you should start to see a return to long-term growth trends.
Patrick Gorman, I haven't forgotten about you. Your take on all of this, I'm sure a similar one?
Well, I'm relieved that at least one person in the Liberal government has an economic plan, and that's Jason's plan to get Australia into the G7. It would be great if some of his colleagues would have such optimistic views on the Australian economy. Well, Jason's got to do it, and good on him. I wish him well in his endeavour. But when it comes to economic growth, Jason just said that the government is doing all it can. The government is not doing all it can. Labor has been saying very clearly it would be good to see that second round of tax cuts potentially brought forward. It would be good to see infrastructure investment that is already committed in the budgets to be brought forward. And when you've got more and more people going onto the unemployment queue, which costs the government a large amount in welfare payments, you've got to ask, wouldn't they have been better in the first place to have just increased New Start for those who do need it to help stimulate demand in the economy? Instead, you've got more people going on the unemployment queues because this government doesn't have an economic plan. It's not good enough.
Well, you do have to recognise, though, the recent years of jobs growth have been very good in terms of adding jobs to the economy. You'd admit that, wouldn't you?
Oh, of course. I mean, every person that gets a job is adding to our economic capacity.
Not just every person, but that there's been very strong jobs growth overall for a few years.
Yes, and I do acknowledge that. The reality is, though, that we've, over the last few months, become very clear that there is no plan for the future. And the government can give itself as many awards and pats on the back that it likes about how they've done in the past. But what we're seeing now is that lack of a plan about what's next is really holding the national economy back.
The plan from the Treasurer today, Jason Falinski, is apparently back to federation and some cooperation. It feels like a tune we've heard before. He didn't want to put any detail on it. Is there something you'll put forward that'll get things going?
You're being very provocative this afternoon, Tom. I can see why. Is this your warm-up for your next political panel, or are you just giving us a good go?
Come on, Jason, you're tougher than that. You can handle a tough question.
I bring back Amanda Rishworth. Listen, no, he's giving a speech tonight, the Sir John Downer oration in Adelaide. I think that he'll put more meat on the bone, as they say at that point. Yes, I've been in the media as saying that I think a federation works better, that when the level of government spending the money is also the level of government raising the money, because it creates a nexus for the electorate to see the offset between spending and taxing, which otherwise you don't get. It's well known in our federation system at the moment that the Commonwealth rakes in 80% of the tax dollars, but roughly 80% of that money is spent by the states, and I think a realignment in that would be something that would have long-term positive effects.
Does this go back to the income tax gathering of states in some way? Are you banging that drum?
Back in the Second World War, or back to Malcolm Turnbull's proposal, or?
Well, we'll go to Malcolm Turnbull's.
Okay.
Still like a little bit more recent.
Well, yeah, I think that's an idea worth re-examining. I really believe that, because one of the issues that the states also have is that they hold so many of the levers to economic reform, whether it's planning, transport, health, education, all those sit, for that matter, policing and security and safer neighbourhoods, all those things sit with state governments.
Yeah.
And they need to be incentivised to be continuously undertaking economic reform. The problem that they have at the moment is that when they undertake economic reform, which grows our economy, most of the benefits in higher tax receipts is actually collected by the Commonwealth. And the way that our federation system works at the moment...
I get that argument.
Yes?
Yeah, no, I get that argument, and that's fine. But, I mean, I'd like to ban a Marsh playing for the Australian cricket team again, but it's not going to happen. Is this idea going to happen? Are you wasting your energy? Is anyone in government sympathetic to it?
Well, you know, Tom, don't give up on your dream. I think it's a positive one, and it would be great. And in terms of my dream, look, there is no one ever lost anything by advocating good reform, and you know, we have to keep banging the drum and see that it happens. Look at the Tom. Can I? You've just it's just occurred to me. Look at the GST. I mean, John Howard first tried that in 1980. Keating tried that in 84 and 85. Houston tried it in 93, and it finally became law in 99. So these things take time.
All right. Do you agree with the logic of it, Patrick Gorman?
Look, I think the framing of what Treasurer Frydenberg has done, which is basically to come out, drop a speech to the newspapers. I read it in the West Australian this morning, where he was basically saying to the states, stop asking for money, stop asking for things that are important for your communities. Unless you're interested in doing what I tell you to do, you know, the checkbook is closed. I mean, it was a very uncooperative way of trying to give a speech saying that you want more cooperation about big macroeconomic reform. I don't think the Treasurer is serious about this. I think he just wanted to give a speech smashing up on state governments, and I think that's really disappointing. And I'm very concerned that what I just heard from Jason when he references the GST example is one of the things that we know that a number of Liberals, and I think Jason's included in this category, talk about is increasing the GST. That would be a major reform. It would be a very bad reform. And if Treasurer Frydenberg is looking to pave the way for a conversation about increasing the GST, no way. That is just a terrible thing to do.
That's
and do it on the back of smashing up the states.
Point me to where he's saying that.
I said softening up for a push to increase the GST. We know that the New South Wales government has put forward this as one of the options. Jason, why don't I just ask Jason, do you think that the increase in the GST should be on the table?
No, I don't, Pat, but the person who first raised that as an idea was Jay Weatherill when he was still Premier of South Australia.
Well, Jay's, as we know from the Labor Party review, had a few bigger problems on his plate in recent times.
Poor Jay.
I reckon I'll have to score that one 1-0 to Falinski, I reckon. But as he says, don't give up on your dreams. Finally, just want to ask you about the motion that's passed the Senate this afternoon. This is for the Prime Minister to meet with these former emergency workers and at least 5 former fire chiefs or commissioners as well, to get an idea of the situation, what might need to change, resources, planes, hazard reduction and so on. Should he heed that call, Jason Falinski?
Well, of course, he should always listen to the Senate and motions passed in the Senate. It just, I mean, I'm being political in saying this, but really, you know, the amount of politics being played in the Senate over these natural disasters is very disappointing, and this,
We'll scrap the Senate part of it.
Yep.
These people want to meet with the PM. Should he meet with them?
Well, I think that someone from the government should meet with them. I think the appropriate person to meet with them in the first instance is David Littleproud. I understand that they've previously been offered a meeting with Angus Taylor. They've now been offered a meeting with David Littleproud. I would encourage them to take that meeting and to make their point to David. And if after that it's important for them to still meet with the Prime Minister, then I'm sure the Prime Minister will make himself available.
Is it hard to get a meeting? Does he still pick up the phone to you?
To me? Tom?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course he'll pick up the phone to me. Yes, it is very hard to get a meeting with the Prime Minister of Australia. That's not something a lot of people get to have. So, I mean, when was the last time he gave you a one-on-one interview, Tom?
Recently, actually.
Oh, okay.
G7, your favourite
We'll have
meeting.
to score that one 1-0 to Tom.
Patrick Gorman, they're getting a meeting with the minister responsible for the area. That's fair enough, isn't it?
Fair enough at this point in time. I think Jason's right that if the Minister sees it's necessary that further conversations ahead, the Prime Minister engages himself. What we're going to need to see, not now, but in the future, is a long conversation about how do you start to bring together all of those service delivery agencies, all of those fire and protection agencies, and have a conversation about how do we, as Australia, make sure that we've got all of our resources pointing in the right direction. It's that's a big conversation. It's probably bigger than just the Prime Minister. It involves other ministers. It possibly involves some people on the Labor leadership side. These are things that I think most serious people have said over recent days are above politics. Let's make sure that that spirit continues as we look at the lessons to be learned and how we act for the future.
I think we could probably all agree on that. Patrick Gorman, Jason Falinski, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks, Pat.
Thanks, Jason.